Hello everybody, welcome to the Norfolk Senior Center for a great program, I'm sure. We're very pleased to have Ken Gloss from the Brattleboro Bookshop with us tonight, and he's going to talk about rare books, and then I think if you have some time at the end, you might be able to look at if people brought any with them as well.
Definitely.
Definitely, okay. So I'll let you take it from here.
First of all, thank you. First of all, can everybody hear me? Okay, so I'm going to leave the microphones alone and so on. What I do in a talk, the talk will last for about an hour total. The first 20 minutes, first half hour, 40 minutes, I basically will give a little bit of my background, tell some stories about places, estates, books I've seen. I hope you all watch Antiques Roadshow because I'll tell some stories about appraising for Antiques Roadshow and show off a few of the things that I brought. And the next 20 minutes I like to do question and answer because I can go on and on and on and on about old books. And at least with question and answer I can go on about what you want to listen to. The last minute or two of the talk, I will tell a couple of last stories. Then I'll end the formal part of the talk. Anyone who wants to go can go. Anyone who's brought books, I do it more in a crowd scene. You're more than welcome to stand over my shoulder and listen to what I'm saying, but I don't do it to the whole audience. And I don't do it in any particular order. Quite honestly, the less order there is, the faster it goes. And one of the things that my wife says to me now is now that I've gotten a little bit older, I only work half a day. I get into work at 5:30 in the morning. The store closes at 5:30. That's 12 hours, and it's only half a day. And so when I do talks like this, it goes a little longer, and I like to get home. So that part of it I do quickly, but I will look at everybody's books. I guess a lot of the fun of books is the stories behind it, the people, the places. So little history of the store. The history of the store goes back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And it's always been in Boston. People call us, they're in Harvard Square, where are you? We tell them we're in downtown. When my parents first bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where City Hall Plaza in Boston is now. And my father's had 7 different locations over the years, and he built the store mainly on his hard work, his knowledge, but he also was a bit of a character and a showman and built the store up. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal, but every time my father would move the store, when it was a planned move, he would move the best books over to the new location. Then he'd run sales, half price, dollar, 50-cent, quarter dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell, people go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again, that group would leave, next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, and we were moving from the end of Washington Street in Boston to West Street, where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman, if you can picture this. He hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team, and on the cover of the covered wagon it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They filled it up with books and they drove it from the end of Washington Street by Boston City Hall up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, where we are now, and then back down Washington with my father sitting in back throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend of his, told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across anyways. And we've been on West Street since 1969. When we first moved there, we were in a 150-year-old wooden building, crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. And we basically had no insurance. Matter of fact, the insurance didn't even cover the demolition of the building. Any of you who have commercial buildings, demolition insurance is a good rider because that costs more than we had insurance. But we found a storefront. We wanted to keep going, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors up the street. People either gave, sold us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And within a month, we reopened. Now, it was a meager stock. We rented folding tables. Over the next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is, again, sort of the old Dickensian style of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and so on. In that type of business, the large, old, general secondhand bookstore is a dying business, especially in the inner cities. It's not dying because people don't like books, read books, sell books, enjoy books, but particularly in the cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have gone out of business. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s. I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters now who are in the late 30, early 40. I don't think they have any interest in coming into it the way I did. And I've done this almost literally all my life. My parents say my first word was book. I honestly don't know, but I'm sure they were talking about them all the time. Maybe it was. And I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summers during college. I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now is over 50 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And one of the real fun parts about the store, it's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island every day, going out to someone's house, estate, never knowing what you're going to see, the people, the places. And sometimes the people actually, even the people who work for us can be really characters and interesting. When I first started full-time at the store, so this is a long time ago, I hired a new employee, and he had worked there a day or two. It wasn't much more than that. And an older man came in the store, and he wanted books by an obscure author, Donald Yates. He's a novelist. I knew who he was. I went to the section, Donald Yates. We didn't have any. I said to him, do you want to leave your name? At the time, we had index cards keeping names of people, and he said, no, I'll check in some other time. He left. My new employee, he comes up and he goes, does that man come in here often? And I said, you know, I really wasn't paying attention, but no, I didn't really. And he goes, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And this employee had one of the most memorable introductions that well, it's 50 years later and I'm still right. In any case, my wife worked for a time, the way she likes to put it is for the Boston local professional basketball team. In any case, we had 4 tickets to a Celtics game. And I said, Hugh, we've got 2 extra tickets. Do you want to go? And he said, sure, but give me the tickets. I'll meet you there. My wife and I get there. He's sitting there with a woman. And again, this was one of the best introductions. He turns, I'd like you to meet my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? And he worked for us for another 15 years and nothing ever changed. It was but going out to the houses is a lot of fun. And I'll relate a few of those stories. Then I'll tell some more stories and then I'll talk a little about Roadshow. I was out of the store. I got back. There was a message that a Mrs. Fisher had called. This was a while ago. And I called her up and she said, oh yes, my father died in Providence. He has 500 art reference books. We want to get the best price we can. We're inviting a number of dealers down to bid on them. Would you be interested? Well, Providence is only an hour away. I mean, we drive all over New England, all over the Northeast. It was no problem at all. They lived in an old Benefit Street, which is an old street up near Brown University. I got to the house. It was a large old colonial house. Got led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted. I was pleased. She was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction. But would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Their house in Newport is one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family, and at one point wandering from the basement to the attic all on my own without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, do this. Well, it was fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, when I come to groups like this, I do hundreds of free appraisals. I do them on the road show, at the store all day long. People are calling, email, whatever, and we do them for free. Verbally, there's no problem. But every once in a while, someone needs a very formal written appraisal for insurance, estate taxes, whatever. Then we discuss the fee. In any case, another mansion in Newport, not as big as the Browns. This was the Perry family. Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So it's a little different nowadays. When my father was still alive, and he died over 35 years ago, we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about who she was, what she had, whatever, but she lived in Sharon. It was close. We decided we'd go out and see what it was. I got to her house. It was a little ranch house. Paint was peeling. Weeds were growing. And you sort of say, oh, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. Really, really beautiful antiques. It turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues and all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got in the house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors. They were about this size, pastoral European scenes. When I first looked at them, I thought they were nice. The more she talked and the longer we were there and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors, they're pretty nice. She turned around and said, oh yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of painting. And it was like, oh yes, they were. So you never know the people, the characters, the story. And speaking of characters, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday parties, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? He said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. Says, I like Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Now, he was a much younger man at the time, really looking forward to this dinner, all the learning and insight he was going to get. And he said he got to the table a little early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was quite elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing, sat down opposite. And he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, "My Tom, you look very good." And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on and on and on with these stories. I'll tell one more, and then I'll get to a few other things. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store. People wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. And most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of our head. Some are a little more involved, and occasionally you really have to do some research, but that can be fun. But every once in a while you get a call that really stands out. Again, this was a while ago. I answered the phone, "Hello, Brattle Bookshop, can I help you?" Lady, elderly, very thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." Now, you have to admit that gets your attention. And she stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. When he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Presidential letters of any type have value. Handwritten letters, particularly from later 20th century presidents, are very rare, high-priced, and she wanted to get an offer. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was great. The letters were wonderful. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer, much as I suspected, though. There was no way she could sell these letters. Letters were part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll hear about them again. And there are a lot of things when I do these talks. I get questions like, do you collect books? And my answer is no, but. No, I don't collect books, and part of the reason I don't collect books is when I was growing up, my father was bringing home 4, 5, 6, 7 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years, and you can imagine what our house looked like. And he always meant to read a chapter, an introduction, a book jacket, or whatever, but there were just heaps and piles. So I read a lot. I read a lot about books, book collecting, local history. I read Stephen King, John Grisham. There's a particular book that John Grisham wrote called Camino Island about book theft, he actually, there's a section in it, I won't go into detail, but he describes me to a T other than change the name. So when I don't know John Grisham. I had no idea, but all of a sudden I started getting calls from friends saying, well, you're in this book and whatever. So I was at an Antiques Roadshow in Wisconsin, and I was actually in Sheboygan. And I get a call from my shop. They said, a man called. He said, it's John Grisham. We don't know if it is, but here's the number. I called, and it was John Grisham. And he said, I heard you were a little upset about being in the book. And I said, well, you said that I was a thief because I was the fence for the stolen material, and it was a failing business. And I said, I don't mind the thief part, but the failing business? I said, no. He said he owes me a dinner. He sent me an inscribed copy. It's been a number of years now. I don't know if I'll ever get my dinner. But if I'm ever in Charlottesville, I do have his cell phone number, so I'll be either knocking on the door or whatever. But so you never know. But I read a lot, but my wife has a collection, or had a collection of books. She had about 1,000 books on jazz and roots music. She was looking, and she also had some wonderful signed photos of jazz musicians. She had one, like a great photo of Eubie Blakes inscribed to W.C. Handy. The one she liked the best was she had one, and it was a picture of a marquee, and the marquee was Louis Armstrong, and then further down featuring Billie Holiday. And it was inscribed to Pops Who Taught Me Everything, Billie. And well, what happened though is she said, she started looking at this collection, and she said, 90% of these, in 10 or 15 years from now, people aren't going to know who 90% of these people are. Someone really wanted the collection. They worked out a deal. They had them. She was happy. And one other thing that it's sort of a strange type of thing. A lot of books, dust jackets, as we know them, started around World War I. It was more a technological thing. They go back to the early 1800s, but they were very plain, simple. They literally were just to keep the dust jacket off. But a lot of books in the 19th century had very decorative covers. And the reason they had decorative covers was the publishers figured if the book caught your eye when you walked in the store, better chance you might buy it. And I actually, and a lot of these are very cheap. You can go to library sales, yard sales, antique stores, bookstores, and pick them up cheaply. There are some that are expensive. And individually, they might not seem like much, but decoratively, as a collection, they can actually be very nice. And I actually have a collection. One day, I got a book in, it had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title was Flushed with Pride. It was the life of Thomas Crapper, invented the toilet. In any case, I brought it home, I showed it to my wife, she took one look at it and said, we have to put that in the bathroom. So we did. A couple of days later, I got another book that had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But with a big eye staring at you, I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now this is a little half bathroom. There's no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and now there are 300 or 400 of these Victorian-style illustrated books in the bathroom. People walk in, they're a little taken aback, loads of reading material. And one rule of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book will fall off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. And so, you know, that's one of the things. But also some of the things, not that I've owned or bought, but held and touched, and it can be really fun too. A few of those. I got called by a museum to do an appraisal. Now, it was an item that they were loaning to another museum for an exhibit, but they needed an insurance policy while it was being loaned. And I said, I was a member of it. I said, I'll do it for free, no problem, but I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I'd like to see the original. They said, no problem, just make an appointment, come by. It was and I'm holding this, it was a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. So you're holding this, Paul Revere, 4 pages, hand wrote a week later, everything that even exists. And you're touching it and holding it. Another time I got called to a local college, and they had some books and things, and one that was special was they had a first edition of Principia Mathematica by Isaac Newton in the 1600s. It's basically Isaac Newton's foundation to modern mathematics. By itself, the book is upwards of $1 million or more. But this was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margins. And you know, I mean, I studied science to be able to touch and hold and feel. And not only did I do that, I got to do it in his study. Many people don't realize that Isaac Newton's study is actually in Wellesley. There was a man named Babson, who was a very wealthy industrialist who collected everything he could get of Isaac Newton's, including buying his study and shipping it over here. I don't know that it's open to the public, but Isaac Newton's study is at Babson College. The book went from Babson to MIT and then out to Pasadena, the Huntington Library. I was at a book show. I went to the Huntington Library. I went to see the book. It was in a glass case, and I went to myself, I held that book. It was really special. And another time, I got called to a semi-museum, but I got called in the basement. It was a modern basement. There was a folding table. On the table were a few documents, the Bill of Rights, the Pilgrim Charter, and there was a Declaration of Independence. It was a year later. It was the first one that had ever had the names printed on the Declaration. And across the top, in ink, was, "This is a true and authentic copy," and it was signed John Hancock. And I have to admit, I put my little finger on each one of them. It's at the State Archives. Right across from the Kennedy Library is the State Archives. They have a museum. They're all in that museum now. And the interesting part about that, the reason they wanted someone appraising them, is they had to drive them up to North Andover to have some restoration. And one of the things I learned later is when they drove them from Dorchester to North Andover, they literally shut down Route 93. They literally did it in a motorcade and shut down. They didn't want any other cars or trucks or anything on the road while these documents were being sent up. And you can see them all. They're under cases and so on, but I got to touch them. It was fun. Now, and sometimes they can go in a totally different direction. We one time got a library in of about 2,000 cookbooks. Some of them were very good. They went back to the 1800s. Some of them were more modern. They were good. It was a good collection. But in that collection was also a box of these pamphlets, like Gold Medal Flour, Baker Chocolate Company, How to Make Jell-O, little pamphlets. And they're nice. They can be very colorful. They can be collectible. But I said, we've got to spend the time on the rare books. Tell you what, just put the whole box outside on our dollar table. There'll be some bargains there, but just go ahead. And about 2 hours later, a man comes running in with one of the pamphlets. He goes, "I've been looking for this for years and years and years." And it's hard to describe how beside himself he was. And he goes, "And it's only $1." And he went on, and he was just, just so happy. And then I look at the pamphlet, and the title was "Coconuts and Constipation." You never know what somebody's going to want, and it was pretty amazing. And well, it's someone said strange. Yes, you get some strange, but that's where the people are different, and you never know who's going to come in the store or who it's going to be. And I point out, and we always try to be very nice, because maybe there's a young student that comes in. Who knows? Maybe they're going to win a Pulitzer Prize someday. There's someone else who comes in. When I first started working full-time in the early 70s for my father, there was a man who came in, and he had gone to school in Boston, and he worked for a bank in North Carolina, but he liked the store, and he also knows that I get to work very early, even then. And he said, one time he said, "Look, occasionally I have to go up to New York to do some business." He was a vice president at his bank. "And then I could get on a shuttle," which they had then, "and fly to Boston, get there early in the morning, and I can get a 10 o'clock shuttle back to North Carolina." And he said, "Would you be willing to open for me?" And he was a really nice man. He bought books. I said, "Sure." Well, when he first started, he had gone to school. He knew the store. But he was a vice president of the bank. No offense if any of you are vice presidents at banks, but they tend to have lots of vice presidents. But as a few years went by, he was a senior vice president, executive vice president. His bank merged, and he was president of Bank of America. And he still would call me up and say, "Can I come in early? I'm going to be in the bar." He was at that point president. Now, the unfortunate part was, he got sick. He died much younger than he should have. But that student was the president of Bank of America, and one of the nicest people you ever wanted to meet. like I say, I can go on and on. One of the things I also collect, and you're not going to be able to see this, but and I'll just hold it up sort of, and you'll get the idea. There's page after page, and there's like either a sentence, a phrase, a word, whatever. Every single one of these is a story. And I could literally take them, put them on a wall, throw dots at the wall, and I could do the whole lecture just from that. And it's a lot of, and I keep adding. We recently got a man came into, he was in the store, I guess he called us up about a week later. He goes, "Did anyone find a little black pouch in the store?" And I said, no. He goes, "Oh, well, it was filled with diamonds." And I go, "No," I said, "definitely we would have noticed if we found a pouch full of diamonds." But there's, let me see. Well, here's one that's interesting. Just when you get into some interesting collections, we have a customer who collects 1968. He feels it's a very important date and time. Any book, anything we get of 1968, he wants. And I keep an eye out for it, whether it's a book done in 1968, a newspaper, a magazine, maybe a high school yearbook. Because he thinks it's, with all of the assassination, he thinks it was a changing time in our country's history. But he also wants all the background, everything that goes with it. He collects 1968. We also have people who collect one book. For instance, Allison, actually a better one, Thoreau, Walden. When I first started with my father, there was a wonderful man who came in, and he collected Walden. That's all he collected. He had every edition he could find. If it had different colored bindings, he had different colored bindings, different languages. He had 3,000 copies of Walden. And it was a fascinating collection. It was fascinating to see. But also sometimes when you see the same book published year after year after year, even by the way the binding changes, by the way illustrations change, by the way how big, how fancy, how plain and usual paperback, you can almost tell what the public in the society thought of that book changing from year to year to year. Now, the collection is now in Concord at the Thoreau Society, but people can collect one book. Alice in Wonderland is another one. Christmas Carol are books that people collect and so on. But let me talk a little about Antiques Roadshow. First of all, again, I hope all of you watch Antiques Roadshow. And one of the reasons that I hope you all watch it is because the more people who watch it, the better the ratings. The better the ratings, the more likely PBS is to fund it year to year to year. And I've done it for over 20 years, and I love doing it, so I want it to be continued. I mean, one of the great things about Antiques Roadshow is, as an appraiser, is that you go all over the country. I've been to all 50 states now, just did that last year. But anywhere you go in this country, especially my wife comes with me a lot of times, we usually can go 2 or 3 days early, actually see it. If you make any effort, every place is beautiful, the people are wonderful. Don't talk about politics and religion. But it's absolutely gorgeous and people are wonderful. One of the things that people don't realize about Antiques Roadshow is the appraisers don't get paid anything. I mean, they don't pay airfare, hotel, meals. We pay our own way. Well, it's public television. There are 75, 80 appraisers at a show, 5 shows, if you think about how much it would cost to pay that. But what we do get out of it is if we get on TV, 8+ million people watch each show. So that's a good thing. But there's also no guarantee that you're going to get on TV because they don't. There are a few things that come in a little early, but they don't set it up. It's all what people come. So the way that show works is you appraise on a day. It used to be at a convention centers. Now it's at sort of vast estates or gardens or whatever, nice settings. And they, about 3,000, there's a lottery. You get, the tickets are free, but there's a lottery to get tickets. Some cities, they have 30, 40,000 people apply for tickets, and 3,000 people get tickets. Each person gets, brings two items, and you appraise, you're sitting at a table from about 7 in the morning, sometimes almost till 7 in the evening. There are 3 book appraisers next to print appraisers, next to poster appraisers, military and so on, all around. People come in. Now, also the people who come in, they've basically won the lottery. But you appraise all day long. And an ideal day for an Antiques Roadshow appraiser is around 8, 9 in the morning, someone comes in with something interesting. They don't know everything there is to know about it. I mean, there are people who come to Antiques Roadshow with spectacular items, and you say, well, what do you want to know? And they say, well, I bought it at Sotheby's yesterday. It's like, wait a minute, there's nothing, you know more about it than we do. So you need the story behind it. That's one of the main things. But 8:30, someone comes in with something interesting. You call a producer over, the producer comes over, they ask the appraiser, us, why you want it on TV, out of the earshot of the guest. The producer then goes, talks to the guest. Ideally, the producer then says, sure, go film it. By 9:30, you've filmed something. The rest of the day goes really easily. But if it's getting to be 4, 5, 6 in the afternoon, evening, and you haven't taped, it gets very nerve-wracking because there's a good chance you could go home and not have taped anything. So that's it. So the early thing, and there was a city that I did, it was Kansas City, and a man came in at around 9:30 in the morning, and he had a few things that weren't, well, they were interesting, but not, they were a couple of things signed by Pope John Paul. He had some rosary beads from the Pope, which are very nice, but there was nothing really outstanding. But then he pulled out some photographs, 8x10 photos. Turned out he was the pilot that flew the Pope and his entourage around the United States when they came over in the 70s. And then he started telling stories about what was going on behind the scenes and all the goings on and so on. And then he pulled out this one photo, and I'm going, oh, wait a minute, this is great. It was usually when people have photos taken of them with the Pope, it's very, very formal. The Pope is wearing vestments. He's standing there. His hand is out with his ring. People come, they kneel, they kiss the ring, they get a photo. It's a very formal. This photo, though, the pilot was in the pilot's cockpit in his seat. The Pope was dressed in the full vestments, but he was reaching over like this with one leg in the air, reaching over and signing his Bible. I'm going, this is great, this is wonderful. And I said to the man, okay, let me see the Bible. And he goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go get it? He goes, it was a Saturday. He said, no, it's in a safe deposit. And I'm going, ah! I ended up taping something later in the day, but in any case. And one of the things when you do appraisals at groups like this or at the store or so on, almost always people are happy, they're fine. You expect people when you tell them it's worth $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 to be happy, but actually a lot of people are thrilled when you say, and I have a million ways of doing this, it's really not, it's sentimentally valued, but not more. And almost in all those cases, people go, great, now I don't have to worry about it. I can give it to the grandchildren, I can read it, I can give it to the book sales and so on. It's like you've freed them up. But 99.9% of the people are happy or appreciative, but every once in a while you get somebody that no matter what you do, they're not going to be happy. Now, my wife appraised at the Antiques Roadshow for a year or two. I love being there for 10 or 12 hours, standing, talking to people, seeing the books, talking to the other appraisers. She didn't like it as much, so she comes, but she doesn't do the appraisals. But she was doing an appraisal. And again, one of the things that you have to be careful of, or don't want to be careful, you want to really, people won the lottery. Some of them have driven hundreds of miles to get to the venue. You get to the venue, you wait in a long line to go what they call, see 6 or 7 appraisers called triage. Triage don't appraise, but what they do is you go to paintings, you go to books, you go to collectibles, you go to posters. So they just direct them. Then you get to the table you want to go to and you're waiting in line again. So when people get to you, you realize they've gone through a lot, they're really looking forward, and you want to treat them nicely. You don't, I mean, I could look down the aisle and go, junk, junk, junk. Oh, okay, let's see this one. You don't do that. Each one you look. Anyways, a lady comes up to my wife and she says, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife looks at the book very nicely, opens it carefully, looks, and and she says to the lady, it is signed by A. Lincoln, but just not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady in this tone goes, how can you tell? And my wife opens the book up again into the title page, and she goes, well, the first clue is this book was printed in 1911. And the lady goes, so? And my wife goes, I learned in school he was assassinated in 1865. Lady slams the book closed, goes, you don't know what you're talking about, and storms out. Now, one of the things that happens, that's really extreme, but when people want something to be what they want it to be, they can convince themselves of almost anything. And that's an extreme case, but many times I look at something, someone comes in with something, it's signed by George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Albert Einstein, or it's a very rare first edition, and you initially look at it and you want it to be what you want it to be so much that you almost convince yourself that it is. And then you go, ah. And one of the things is you don't have to know everything about everything. All you have to do is know who would know, and you have to be on good enough terms that they'll answer your question. So many times I get something in and I'll call, email a colleague and say, could you look at this too? And usually when you get that inkling, it's not, but the one with A. Lincoln is an extreme example. I'll tell you what I can go on and on, like I say, I could go on forever. But why don't I see if there are some questions at this point? And quite honestly, anything you ask me, I can go off on a tangent. So does anyone have any questions? Yes.
If you have a book and it has a dust jacket and the dust jacket is in disrepair and the book may have a book plate in it, do those things contribute to its value or lack of value?
The question is essentially asking about the condition. Does the condition of the book make a difference? Does the paper dust jacket on a 20th century book or so on make a difference? The answer is absolutely, yes, definitely, no question. Generally, when collectors are collecting, they want something in the absolute perfect condition. They want it as close to what it came out in as it can be. And people who can afford it will pay absolute top price for the very, very best, but might not consider spending anything at all for something less. And now there are some books that are so rare, so valuable, that people will take exceptions. There's a book, the Gutenberg Bible, which is the first printed book in the Western civilization, done in the 1450s. Well, first of all, if you had a Gutenberg Bible and wanted to buy one and there was one available, it would be upwards of $100 million plus. But a single page from the Gutenberg Bible, which is just one page out of a book, can sell for $50,000 or $100,000 or $150,000. So, but I assure you, if I took one page out of this book, all I'd be doing is having a piece of paper, nothing more. When you talk about the dust jacket on a book, it is amazing how much difference that makes on a modern book, the being in perfect shape, because the dust jacket's very fragile. Probably one of the more extreme examples is Great Gatsby, which F. Scott Fitzgerald's classic. A copy in good condition, a little better than this, without a dust jacket, 4, 5, 6,000. Maybe if it's in really good shape without a dust jacket, might be 7 or 8. A copy of Great Gatsby in perfect condition with a perfect dust jacket can sell upwards of $200,000. So essentially, that paper jacket is worth a few $100,000. And so have one without the jacket, or get a Stephen King novel, one of his earlier novels, in perfect shape with the jacket, will get a good price. Without the jacket, it might get something, but the people want it perfect. Also, just when you're dealing with authors, usually the earliest books in their careers are the more valuable ones, because the publisher, no one knew who they were. The first Harry Potter book in England was done in a relatively small edition. That book, in perfect shape, has sold for upwards of $400,000. The last book, the first edition, was 10 million copies. I assure you that's never going to be valuable. Anyone else or any other? Yes?
When you go to look at books, say at an estate sale, and there's lots, thousands, where do you start? Aren't you overwhelmed?
Well, the question is, when we look at books at an estate sale, aren't you overwhelmed and so on? Well, first of all, when people call, because we go out almost every day, one of the first questions we ask people when they call up and they say they have a library, sometimes it's a relative, sometimes someone. The main reason people sell books is they're moving from the big house to the small, or someone's died and it's an estate. There's every other reason you can think of, but those are the main. The first thing we ask is about how many books do you have? The first answer is almost always a lot. And then we ask, what kind of books do you have? And usually the answer to that is fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. So we try to narrow it down. Is there any particular subject, area, field? Or nowadays, what we tell people, if books are on bookshelves, just take some digital pictures of the shelves. If they're in focus is important. And we can read the spines. That's one of the best ways to get to know. But no, I don't tend to. We just, a couple of months ago, bought 20,000 books at an estate in Wayland. Now, you also people think of my job and people who work at the store is we're sitting there looking at books, talking about books, reading books. It's an incredibly physical job. You buy 1,000 books in a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. You've got to move 1,000 books out of a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. Matter of fact, a job interview at the Brattle Bookshop starts like this. Do you have any old sporting injuries, back injuries, leg injuries, arm injuries, neck injuries? Next question is, do you have any allergies to dust, mold, mildew? We get through that, and then we go, where did you go to school, what's your background, and so on. Because if you can't get through the first two, it's so on. But no, because most people, when you go to their houses and look at the books, you can see what they are. If the books, and you start seeing, and every single book is a very rare, very valuable book, then it will take a lot of time. But if you look at the walls, and they're sort of general subjects, even if they're older, a lot of that averages out. So you sort of sample here and there. You look, you'd see what the subject is. Is it an area that people are asking for? Is it not? And you can actually, if you do it every day, your eyes spots it and really quickly. Saw a hand over here. Yes. I guess, yes.
So I was just wondering if things that you see, like the one that you mentioned about Paul Revere, if things like that get into history books and the historians can use the information from something like that or something at Antiques Roadshow that has not been seen before and shows the light on a piece of history, you know.
Well, I mean, when you see something that has historical value, I mean, first of all, the Paul Revere's at a museum. I am sure Longfellow, when he wrote the poem, if you read Paul Revere's account, Longfellow read that and used it. There's absolutely no question in my mind. So Yes, if they're in museum, a lot of the value is the historical value, the value that you get and can use in new knowledge and so on. Now, nowadays, actually, books that you would buy just because you want the knowledge have dropped tremendously in value because of the internet. I mean, when was the last time someone bought an encyclopedia or a dictionary? So or even art books, if you wanted them so you could see pictures a lot of books that you just wanted the information from have gone down in value because the internet, it's free. Although people who want the object, that's still collectible. And it's changed, but it always changes. I am sure if you went to book dealers 100 years ago, they tell you how it changed so much from before them. So that is one thing. Now, as far as when you do something at the Antiques Roadshow, we have no idea who the people are. They don't tell us. We can't ask. They don't want any type of business done at that show. Matter of fact, let's say you brought a really valuable thing and we were at the show and I said to you, give me your phone number because I want to call you about this later. If the producers found out about that, they'd throw me off the show. They want absolutely no business. If you, the next day, there's a list of all the appraisers, called me, without me encouraging you, then we could talk. But we cannot in any way, form, whatever, even suggest that. But that's up to the people who own the materials, whether they want it out there, whether they want it known. Now, one thing I will say about that is, let's say you have a letter of someone famous, George Washington, and it reveals something that nobody ever knew about. If you let that be copied and someone write it in a history book or someone use it and get on the internet, that will lower the value if you went to sell it. Because part of the value is this is an unknown fact, an unknown thing. So some collector, library, institution will particularly pay more for it because it's something unique and new and it brings prestige and scholars to their section. So there's a real fine line about what you want to give out before you sell and so on. And it depends on what your objective is too. I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell 2 more stories now, and then I'm going to end the talk. Now, like I said, I will do all appraisal work for you. I'll also answer any questions that you haven't asked or didn't want to ask to a whole audience. But I'll end with 2 stories. Sometimes I get asked, what do I consider my most valuable, precious book? And one time my daughters said to me, they were talking and they go, all these wonderful Audubons and letters and documents and rare books and all of them. And they said, and you've sold them. And they said, don't you wish you had kept some? And without even blinking my eye, I said, yeah, so I can sell them again. But there is one book that there's about a 45-year-old book of The Night Before Christmas. It's a very nice little edition of it. It has beautiful illustrations. But that copy of The Night Before Christmas, I have read to my daughters every single Christmas Eve from the time they were young, even now. One's 40, one's 37, and to the point where one of my daughters is married to someone in Texas. Now, they live around here, but a lot of times Christmas they go to Texas. Before FaceTime, I actually recorded myself reading it on YouTube so that on Christmas Eve, she could hear me reading it to her. Now, YouTube. Now, she has 2 children, and they're 2 and 4. I've read it to them every Christmas Eve. My other daughter lives in Nairobi, and she has a 2-year-old. But on FaceTime, the only problem with that is Nairobi's 8 hours ahead of us, and a 2-year-old goes to sleep at about 7. So I actually have to end up reading it in the day before morning to get it to the 2-year-old, and then we have a 3-month-old who hasn't heard it yet, but she will in a few months. That copy of The Night Before Christmas means more to me, is more valuable, is more precious than any other book that I can think of. Now, my daughter here keeps it, and she jokes, so you can't sell it, but also so I can't lose it. So that is what I consider my most precious book. One of the things that I like talking about at the very end is Bibles. And one of the reasons I like to talk about Bibles a little is the Bible is the most commonly printed book of all time, always has been, probably always will be. We sometimes get 5 and 10 people a week calling in with 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. And in almost all of those cases, we have to say, if this is your family Bible and it's been handed down through the generations, sentimentally, it's priceless. Monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, if it's one of those big sort of Victorian Bibles with a beautiful leather clasp, if it's in perfect shape, they can sell for $100, $200, $300 because they make wonderful gifts for ministers, priests, divinity students. Break one clasp, have one hinge of the book go, loses that value. Now, sometimes also, at the beginning, middle, or end of those, there's all the births, deaths, marriages, family history. Those are invaluable to the local historical genealogical society, but now all they want to do is get a digital image of that information. They don't want the whole Bible. Matter of fact, there's a historical society I know of that someone offered them Paul Revere's Bible. Literally, it was his Bible with his name written in it. But the only thing written in it was his name. And they said, no, we don't want it. And the reason is they don't take Bibles. Now, if he had annotated the Bible, they would have loved it. But they take up so much room that if you start taking one, then you've got to take another. Now, they did make sure that it ended up at the Paul Revere house, where they have an... So it wasn't like they dismissed it, but the Bible is the common. Now, there are Bibles that are valuable. There's the Gutenberg Bible. There's the first Bible printed in Natick in America in the Indian language. So it's always worth checking, but in general, not. They don't. But I got called to a large old church in Boston. They had a library that was probably 2 or 3 stories bigger than this room. And they wanted to know if they had just accumulated any rare and valuable books. I spent a day there, and it was actually fun. They did have a few good books mixed in. And at the end of the day, the priest said to me, can you go down the basement? There are some more books. Went down the basement, looked at some more books. And then there was a small room. It was closet. Well, it would sort of be like corner here. The priest opened the door, front to back, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. There were thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I go, what is this? And he says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. Then we go downstairs, open the door, throw it in with the rest of them. And he goes, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it, can use it, great. But if not, you're really not doing anyone a favor. A couple of things just in closing. If you like the stories, I do a podcast called Brattlecast. We have a couple of 20-minute episodes. I put out a new one every 2 weeks. So if you like them, Brattlecast. But if you ever have any questions about books, book collecting, book whatever, call, ask. Don't ever feel you're bothering myself, the people I work with. We love answering questions. Matter of fact, probably the biggest problem asking somebody who loves what they do, asking them a question, it's not getting an answer. It's getting them to stop answering. In any case, I'm going to end so anyone who wants to leave can leave. If anyone's brought any books, you can just crowd around me. I'll answer them all. If you have a big stack, I might only do 1 or 2 and say, go back there, put them down, I'll get to them at the end. But I don't do it to everybody. I'll get everybody, but I don't tell everybody in detail because we'd be here another 2 hours. And I do only work that half day and I want to get home. And if anyone wants to stand over my shoulder and hear what I'm saying, that's perfectly fine. And the one thing I'm going to do as I end, say thank you very much, and I'm going to take the mic off so we don't lose it. Thank you.